Okay, it's live on YouTube, and now I'll bring everyone in. Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special author event. It's an early access author event with Carol M. Cram, author of The Choir, and Karla Cruise, author of The Water Lilies of Mishipeshu. These are two novels that we have officially being released in January and February of this year. And this is our first opportunity for our audience to meet these authors and get to know about these new titles. Sorry, I'm getting some prompts on my screen, so I'm just gotta wade through that. Please say your cameras and mics are open. So if you are in the audience, please keep your mics closed just so there are no distractions. But at some point, I will invite questions from the audience. You're welcome to post those in the chat or also open up your mic and ask those for our authors. In the meantime, please use the chat to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from, and we'd love to hear from you. My name is Colin Musful. If you don't know me, I'm the founder and editor of History Through Fiction, and just really excited to be able to bring these titles to you and to get a chance to let you know about our upcoming titles. So first, let's welcome Carol M. Cram. Carol, if you could say hello and tell us a little bit about The Choir. What's it about?
Oh, hi. Well, I'm coming to you from Bowen Island on Vancouver, near Vancouver in Canada. And the choir uh, takes place in Yorkshire in the 1890s. And it's actually about choir competitions are sort of the core of it. A woman has in a difficult situation. And one of the ways she gets out is she joins some or competes in choir competitions to get money so that she can actually leave her situation with her five daughters. But choirs were a huge thing in the late 19th century in England in competition. So that's really what it's based around. So if you like singing and choirs and books about Yorkshire and the working class, this is the novel.
Yeah, and Carol's novel officially is released on February 24th. If you order it from us, I will be shipping those December 1st, so you can get those prior to Christmas if you want to get a copy. And Carol doesn't yet have her paperbacks yet, so I have it here. I know it's backwards
No,
on the
I know.
screen, but
No,
here's the
it's not.
paperback.
It looks
Oh,
great.
good.
Yeah, yay. I know, I'm just waiting. Any second now. Maybe it'll come today.
And then we have Karla Cruise, author of The Water Lilies of Mishipeshu. Karla, hi.
Hi, thanks so much, Colin, for having me on your podcast. So my novel is set in someplace very different from Carol's, and my novel is actually the story starts at Fort St. Joseph, which is about 7 miles north of where I am right now. It's in southern Michigan, and it's an archaeological site now, but at that time, it was a remote wilderness outpost just in the middle of all the trees, middle of all the forest. And the fort was controlled by the French. It was built by the French in the 1600s, and then the British took it over. And the Native Americans weren't happy at all when the British took it over because they had a totally different policy towards the Native Americans, which meant basically that they had no diplomacy whatsoever for the Native Americans, and they treated them mostly as subjugated people. So there's rebellion brewing when the story opens, and the commander of the fort is Ensign Francis Schlosser, and he's from a long line. And this is true. I'm going to mix a little bit of fiction with the fact, but Francis Schlosser was indeed the commander of the fort at that time, and he came from a military family and he's not at all a soldier. So his primary interest is in botany. So he goes about creating this botanical manuscript with this half French, half Native American woman he meets there. She tells him all about the plants, where to find them, their medicinal purposes. And also because she's a member of this secret medicine society, she also knows their magical properties. So they work together and they create this amazing botanical manuscript, and they're totally focused on the manuscript. And in the meantime, there's this rebellion, Pontiac's rebellion brewing, and they're totally blindsided when the fort's attacked, and most of Schlosser's men are killed. Schlosser is taken off as captive, and the fort itself is burned. And Marguerite, the woman he's working with on this manuscript, takes the manuscript and she runs away with it. So the story is basically the story follows the manuscript and as it changes hands. And it's not doesn't stay in one family, it goes into lots of different families. And that allows me to say a lot about the kind of things that are going on in the area at that time. So there's actually an invasion of the Spaniards, and what the Spaniards were doing in northern Indiana in February, I don't know, but they were here. And then also there were just a lot of settlers who showed up about that time. And then at the same time, there's the Potawatomis who are being forced, they're being removed from their land. That happens around 1838. And and so we go from that kind of situation to all these settlers pouring in, white settlers pouring in, and then robber barons, and after that, industrialization, World War I, World War II, and civil rights era, all the way up to the modern day. So it sounds like it's a huge tome. It's not actually. So it's pretty slender volume. It's about 300 pages. But I tried to, in each one of the chapters, create sort of a mini drama, it kind of shine a light on the life that was led here at that time, at different times. Um, so that's basically the plot.
Yeah, we definitely get to see a wide range of time periods and how in South Bend and how that area changes from generation to generation. So it's really fascinating in that way. You might have said this already. How do you pronounce the name of the marsh? I always can't figure out how to say it in my head.
Kankakee.
Kankakee. Okay.
Yeah, the Kankakee Marsh. Yep. And that was actually that I didn't know this story until I started doing this research, but the Kankakee was bigger than the Everglades, if
Wow.
that's you imagine, and the whole
Wow.
and it was drained. And you can see now if you look at Google Earth and you look at the line between Indiana and Illinois, Indiana's straightened theirs. So basically they made it into a culvert, canal culvert sort of thing. It goes up to the border and then it assumes its natural shape after it gets into Illinois. So yeah, it's totally unfortunate, but it made great farmland, and that's what they were interested in at the time. So that had been a place for Native Americans to hunt. It was their traditional hunting ground, and you know it's gone. There are postage stamp size areas where you can still see what it was like, and if you cross the border into Illinois, you can see more of it. But yeah, the Kankakee is pretty amazing
Wow.
story. What happened with that?
Yeah, unfortunate.
Mm,
Well, let's go back to Carol. Carol, the time period of yours, it doesn't span nearly as much
Yeah.
time. We have 1897, if I remember
Yep.
correctly, and a fictional Briarstown. Is that
Briarstown. Yeah.
yeah.
Fictional mill town in
Yeah. So
Yorkshire.
tell us about the setting and why you chose that.
Well, it's a mill town in Yorkshire. I really wanted to set a novel in the period and with the kind of people that are actually I come from, or my great great grandmother. She lived in a mill town in the 1880s and 1890s, and my grandmother used to tell stories about her. The novel's not about her, but more about those women and the hard lives that they led, bringing up families and, working in the mill was really difficult, these cotton mills in Yorkshire. And one way that women of the time, these working class women, could kind of find some fulfillment was through singing, through choirs. So I kind of wanted to look at that there and how their friendships start to develop over the course of the novel. And also my main character, Eliza, has a relationship with a woman or a young girl that she was friends with, but then she goes off to London and becomes famous. But things don't go well for her, and so it's those two girls coming back together as women and reconciling because they had through various circumstances. Anyway, yeah, so it is that period, and in Yorkshire simply because that is my heritage, and I kind of wanted to write something set in a time that I remember from my grandmother talking to me. And when I was writing dialogue, I could hear her in my head, even though she was a few generations removed and she came to Canada when she was like 9. But still, it was still there, that just that cadence, that way they taught that sort of Victorian sensibility and that working class sensibility where mother was the center of the family was something I wanted to explore. And also just how these women found something in their lives that that was their own, because they couldn't just be mother or working in the mill, but they had something of their own, which I think we all want.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the stage in life they were at, late 20s maybe, and how that's different for them at that time
Mhm.
versus how we view age today?
Yeah, good point. Well, they're all in their late 20s, early 30s, mostly late 20s. Eliza is 29 at the beginning, and Ruth, the woman that goes down south to become a famous actress, is 30. So that's their period of life. So they're right in the middle of their most productive time of life. The working class women all have numerous children because that's what they did. Eliza herself has 6 daughters. And so yeah, and she's in an abusive relationship. So one of the main focuses of the foci of the novel is for her to get away with her 6 daughters. No easy matter to do in a working class woman in 1890s Yorkshire because she had no money. So how was she going to do that? And that's sort of one of the driving parts of the novel. So yeah, late 20s, early 30s, the time of life when they're right in the middle with their little kids, and life is very, very busy and very hectic. And for Ruth, the one from London, she's at the peak of her career as sort of the darling of the London stage until things don't go so well. So that's sort of the period. How it differs from today, we don't tend to have quite so many children. Otherwise, I think women in their late 20s are very busy, and so are my characters. A little more grim. It was a grim time, for sure. They worked such long hours, and a lot of the women in the novel don't actually work. Some work in the mill, some don't. But even if they don't, they've got all these kids, and they've got to take care of the household, and they lived in terrible the housing that they lived in that period was not something you'd want to go to. Just quickly, in Birmingham, one of the very last what are called back-to-backs housing that the working class were housed in the 19th century has been preserved by the wonderful National Trust. And of course, I went there and toured all through it. And so I could see that in my head as I was writing, just how cramped and how cold and kind of grim the working conditions. And that's where my grandmother was born and my great grandmother. And that's where they came from, is um, that area, that type of housing, as which many working class people did.
Well, one thing that kind of stood out to me, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but for both Eliza and Ruth, it was kind of an all or nothing. They had so few options that if one little thing didn't work out, that was it. They didn't have a second shot at it.
No, no, they had very few options. Extremely, yeah, it was very limited. Yeah.
Well, Carla, let's go back to you. You mentioned this botanical manuscript, this elixir, but I don't think you mentioned Mishipeshu, who's featured on the cover of the novel, and who is she, and how is she featured in the novel?
Mishipeshu actually comes from indigenous culture. She's, I shouldn't say she, it's an it in indigenous culture. It's mythological creature, and the mythological creature lives in rivers and protects rivers and is also important in determining their current and storms. And it's a dangerous sort of spirit. And the spirit itself is scary looking, according to lore. It's got fangs, it's got claws, it's got horns, it's got scales, and it's got red eyes. So that's the indigenous creature. And my character is based on that, but it's not the same. So my character is a goddess who has some of those qualities, including the red eyes. And so she is very powerful, and as my sister would call her, a scary chick. And she just has to figure out how to use her power. So this is a coming of age story to a certain extent for Mishipeshu as a goddess. So the water lilies, how is she involved with that? Well, the water lilies were the last plant that was included in the botanical manuscript of Schlosser and Marguerite that I described earlier. And that plant is very exotic. It has a red blossom. It blossoms at night. It's very unusual, and you can make a narcotic from it, a very strong narcotic. And that narcotic brings people visions. It can also kill you, but it brings people visions. And so people are interested in this narcotic for multiple reasons. The goddess is also interested in this because she derives her own power from this water lily. They're set on a collision course, and that's also happening throughout the novel.
And what does she want? Like, what is she trying to figure out throughout this novel? Or it, sorry. Yeah.
Well, mine's definitely gendered. So she's a goddess, and so she it wants to find her sister, and so that's one of her problems. And you were talking a little bit, Carol, about sisterhood, and this is sort of a different kind of sisterhood because they're immortals, and so they just have to figure out how to control their power. But your question was like, what is she going to do with this, or?
Well, I was interested in the eternal nature of Mishipeshu and the fact that these weird, strange people come along and she's trying to figure out who they are and how to get along with them. Can you kind of describe that a little bit?
Yeah, she's basically trying to control the river. And the river, this is also kind of an ecological history of the river. And the river is just being polluted and is falling apart in various ways, and the natural resources around the river are disappearing. And she's threatened during the course of the novel. And so she comes into conflict with these people and doesn't really know what to do with them. She doesn't know the extent of her own powers. So sometimes she seems to win those conflicts and sometimes she doesn't. But basically that's it. She is the protectress of this river that most people in the area are trying to destroy.
I'm noticing that we have someone from France. I know we have a couple people from Canada, of course, so that's kind of neat that we're international. So if we have other countries, please say hello. Let's go back to Carol. Carol, if you could actually read an excerpt for us, and then
Yes, of
got that
course.
handy.
I have to read it from the screen because I
And
haven't
let
got my copy
me,
yet.
while she's doing that, let me post a link to the landing page of the novel if you want to learn more about it, read some of the advanced praise for the novel, or pick up a copy from us. You can order it there. Okay, go ahead, Carol, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so this is actually the first, right at the very, very beginning. Eliza Kingwell slipped her hands into the wash water to gather up her husband's two work shirts, taking pleasure in leaving them to the last, when the water was as dirty as it would get. Nervous excitement squeezed her chest as she kneaded and twisted. The nerves reminded her of how she used to feel, singing for people who clapped and cheered and called for more. In exactly 3 weeks, Eliza would leave her home in this dreary wash house forever. In the middle of the night, after Reg was gone to visit his sister in Leeds, and all the snooping neighbors were tight asleep, Eliza would gather up the girls and go. She glanced over her shoulder to check she was alone in the wash house, although she doubted anyone would come in so late in the day. The other women in the court did their washing and their gossiping in the morning when Eliza stayed away. She opened her mouth to let the delicious hum at the back of her throat escape into the frigid air. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She'd take the girls to the seaside when they got to Devon. When she'd lived there as a child, Dad and Ma could never afford to take her and her three brothers any farther than Exeter. But saved a wretch like me. She let her voice rise, imagining the sound filling her with the warmth of a summer sun. I was lost, but now I'm found. Scooping Reg's second shirt from the soap scum, she She wrung it hard between her chapped palms and then hung it on the wooden rack. "'Twas blind, but now I see." She held the final note for as long as possible before letting it fade to a whisper. Her eyes were well and truly open now. There you go. That's the first
Thank you.
chapter.
So do you sing in choirs? Do you find yourself doing what Eliza just did there when you're doing chores?
I sing a lot, but I'm terrible singing. No, it's interesting. I love singing. It's my lifelong wish that I could have been in choirs. I'm still traumatized that back in grade 8 when I joined the choir, as soon as the choir master discovered I played the piano, 'cause I play the piano, he put me down front and I was the accompanist for the rest of the term. Because I'm not a great singer. I did take singing lessons as part of my research for the novel. I sat in on choir rehearsals in one of our local choirs here on Bowen Island, talked to choir masters, etc. But no, I don't sing in a choir. I wish I did. But singing, I don't think is one of my gifts. Although I love it and I love music and I am a musician. My second novel is about music.
Well, and through your writing, you can bring it to life in our imaginations. It's just as good.
Well, that's why I took singing lessons. So at least I can imagine how she might feel. What comes out of my mouth isn't going to be as good as what comes out of Eliza's mouth, because she has an extraordinary voice, but the process is the same.
Hmm.
So that was sort of how, just by doing it. I think, when you're writing historical fiction, doing what your novel, what your characters are doing as much as you can is really helpful, in the writing process.
Yeah. You brought up Reg in the excerpt. Can you talk about his connection to both these women? Also, can you describe him as a character a little bit? Because when we were doing the audiobook, you had to tell our narrator, like, well, no, I know he sounds like he'd be brutish, but he's actually more like this. Can you kind of describe him a little bit for us?
Yeah, well, Reg, yeah, you would think he is a bit of a brute. I mean, he is an abusive um, husband for sure. But he's very charming. He's extremely charming, and unfortunately, because that's why he's forever going after other women, and he's not very nice to Eliza. But he's also an excellent father. So I didn't want to get him as some kind of, you know, mustache twirling brute. He wasn't. He was certainly not a great guy, and she needs to get away from him in order to for her own self, even though her children are not in danger, but they could be, and she doesn't know that. So he himself is a working class man, a little bit cut above in some ways, that he wants to be a foreman. He was a foreman for a while and he gets demoted for various reasons. But he wants to be upwardly mobile. He wants to be more of a gentleman. He's not a gentleman, no, close, but he thinks he could be. So yeah, he's a little bit nuanced. I'm hoping he's not just some working class brute. He is a man that wants to get above his station in a time when that was extremely difficult. So, he's very frustrated because he can't, get up higher up where he would like. He got, him, and Eliza's his second wife, because his first wife is the mother of Ruth, who's not his daughter. And he has this little penchant for sort of women that are kind of small and delicate and sort of bird-like. He's slightly creepy that way. And that's how Eliza was. That's how Eliza's mother was. And so Ruth was his stepdaughter. And so and Ruth, I don't know, that's kind of a spoiler, so I don't know if I want to go into the whole relationship between Ruth and her
Sure.
stepfather.
There's some tension there between the
There's
two women.
definitely some
Yeah.
tension, and there's secrets. The novel's also about family secrets, the secrets we keep, and also the guilt we feel when we keep those secrets from somebody who, should have known
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to Karla. Karla, I'm going to post a link to the landing page of Water Lilies. We have a request for a French translation, so I guess you and I will have to talk about getting that done. Karla, if you could read an excerpt for us.
Sure. This is in the prologue, and Mishipeshu, my river goddess, refers to people as two-leggeds. So that's a little background before I start reading. The first two-leggeds brought Mishipeshu gifts and revered her. She watched them when they entered the river. Some were clumsy and oddly shaped, others beautiful. Their legs and arms were strong yet soft beneath her caresses. She discovered they could not live long in water. They thrashed violently, became still, then the water would loosen the flesh from their bones. They were poor naked creatures with neither pelt nor fish's tail. Mishipeshu swims with the river's swift current, and when she wishes, dives down to the sandy bottom where black leaves and rotten tree limbs decay. Lying on her back, she watches leaves drop on the surface, pale green in springtime, golden in fall. Animals come to the river to drink, the tranquil face of a doe, the impatient muzzle of a black bear, the rhythmic cat lap of the cougar. She sees the small fish dart through the tall, green, undulating grass and the blackened skeletons of trees holding up their arms in the tessellated sunlight. Canoes have sliced through the blue dome above her head. She's seen the slow-moving rectangles of flat boats and long poles descending, and a large wooden fishtail cutting through the water behind. The paddle boat's rhythmic rumble came next, followed by the high-pitched whine of motors that made her ears ring. But something somewhere had gone quite wrong of late. What was taken did not equal what was given. What was said was more than what was heard. True, night still followed day and day night, but somewhere a stone had shifted beneath a mountain range, or a raindrop that should have joined a river flowing east went west instead. Whatever had happened, Manitou would set things right. A firestorm would scour the earth, smoke would veil the sky, and rain, the sacred tears of the gentle seas, would quiet the great confusion in a general hush. That's how the story would end. But it began quite simply. There was a river, a journey, and an unforeseen death.
Thank you. Well, you describe it there as being simple, but I think from what we've talked about so far, we can see it's not. We have history, we have environmentalism and ecology, we have mythology and tradition. You come from a kind of an academic science background. Can you talk about how you're able to use that background to tell this story, and then also some of the challenges of making it into a fictional narrative?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the things that interest me about science writing are pretty much or similar to what I'm interested in with history, in that I kind of like the process of taking something that's complex and making it understandable. And there is a sense that I want to democratize a lot of this information. When I am just driving around South Bend and it looks like it could be anywhere, right? It's a city like any other in the US. You know, we've got our Applebee's, we've got our Lowe's, we've got our, BP stations in our malls. And it's so predictable that it could be anywhere, but it seems like nowhere. So because it seems like nowhere, I just want to show the ways that it's unique. And in order to do that, you kind of have to go into these archives and take a look at what happened. So I guess that's a similarity in the process, is taking something that's kind of removed from the public and making it public, and maybe making it something that the public owns. And I think about that too when I write about science topics. I don't have a background in science, so that in some ways helps me, because then I figure if I can explain it to myself, then maybe somebody who has no background whatsoever can understand it as well. So it's, I guess, similar kind of process. In this particular book and what I was trying to do with it, I ended up with a structure that was not, I started off with chronological development, and it became 14 chapters. They developed chronologically, but then I wanted to have some kind of moments in between when people could reflect on it sort of in a larger scale. What are the things that are going on, particularly having to do with the environment in this area? So when you think back of what the Native Americans and how they saw the landscape, and they saw the landscape as being spirits, their relatives. It was alive. And basically, the white settlers that came in afterwards saw it as commodities. So that's a major difference in just perspective and how the landscape was perceived. So I wanted to show the ways in which that developed over time, that sort of that perspective on the environment. And so those 14 chapters just proceed chronologically. Interspersed with those 14 chapters are 5 chapters that are sort of have to do with Mishipeshu, who is a goddess. So she lives according to her own time scale, and it's sort of transcendent, but it's just sort of one day. And those chapters let me talk a little bit about her as a character because it's a kind of coming of age for Mishipeshu, and she's learning more about her powers and what she's capable of. But it also shows the dilemma, the environmental dilemma. She's the protectress of the river, and the river is just polluted. So what does she do in that sort of circumstance? So it's an opportunity, though that the way that I've structured it is to see the chronological development in time, just get really specific about some of the more interesting dramas that took place here. And then within the framework, to also talk about sort of the larger issues, more transcendent issues that have to do with well, what is our relationship with nature, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, it really sheds a light on the changes and on some of the environmental issues, but at the same time, because of the way you have 14 kind of separate narratives, you can kind of get engaged in each one without thinking about the overall theme behind it all as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I first got a grant to start this work, it was for a cycle of short stories. And so it developed out of that. And sort of it had to be what it became in order for me to get the kind of message across that I hope that I got across.
Carol, let's go back to you. Let's talk a little bit about your background. We were actually talking about it before the start of the event. You were a longtime teacher. We have a one of the characters in the story is a teacher. It's very relevant to the girls getting together. Talk about your experience teaching and how that helped you kind of bring out the relevance of this character for these women.
Yeah, not actually. Well, I taught for well over 20 years at the college level, and then for a very short time, when I was right at the very beginning of my career, I taught like for 2 weeks in elementary school. And so my main character, not my main character, the character that is a teacher in the novel, teaches in a one room um, schoolhouse kind of thing in Briarstown. I don't think my teaching experience really had a lot to do with her. I'm not really sure. That's because I didn't teach that kind of thing. I didn't teach like regular. I did teach high school as well for about 3 years, but really all my experience was at the college level. But I mean, I love education. I write educational textbooks as well as having been a teacher for decades. So education is kind of like my thing. And there's no surprise that I had one of my characters is a teacher. Think a teacher has so much influence on their students, and they can do so much. And she is very integral to getting the women back to singing and competing in choirs again, because the main character, I forgot what is her name. This is my character. I've forgotten her
Eliza?
name. No, 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 not Eliza, the teacher.
Oh,
I just had a complete. I don't know if you ever had that happen, but what's the name of my
sure.
characters? Anyway, it's completely gone out of my head. Miss Donahue. I can't remember her first name. Anyway, but she becomes very important in the novel to get these women back together, these working class women who she taught when they were children, and then later, comes back and becomes the choir master or mistress and takes them on to these choir competitions. So her desire to help and be an educator kind of transcends several decades. So she has them when they're young, but then she comes back and helps them again when they're older. So just the power
Yeah.
of education, how important teachers are. I really
Yeah, no, I was very interested in Miss Donahue in the way that she's taking care of her mother, and she's like, I've got other stuff to do. I can't really help, but she was so much more important to the young ladies than she realized,
yeah.
and yeah, that really helped them get them on stage and accomplish this great goal, and it was I found it very meaningful part of the story.
Well, and Miss Donahue, she's a teacher, so she was a cut above. The class system in England, particularly at that time, was pretty rigid. So she was the vicar's daughter, and so she was more middle class, and she's working with these very rough, women in their late 20s who've been working in the mills, and they have a hard life. So there is a clash there with class as well. The novel actually deals a lot with class because Ruth manages, the other character gets out of the working class and is elevated. She actually even dines with the Prince of Wales. So, and then and then comes back down again. So it's just how class, informs so much in that period.
Mhm.
Probably still does actually in England, but maybe not quite as much. I lived in England for 4 years back when I was young. I went to university in Northern, near where the novel takes place, actually, and taught kids in the school, not all that far. So that sort of experience also kind of got into the novel.
Well, and maybe that contributes to your. We were talking about the audiobook and your insistence on getting Yorkshire accent correct. Can you talk about why that's so important?
Well, it's just that, when people are listening to an audiobook, they want to make sure that the accent is, pretty close to what it would be. Like a really strong Yorkshire accent would be really hard to understand. So, we made sure it was toned down, but at least enough of the flavor. I just think it's important that heritage and that accent is honored. Yeah, it was sort of tough on my audiobook narrator because there's also a Welsh guy in the novel. So we do the Welsh accent. There's the upper class British accent. There's Devon plus lots of Yorkshire. So she had her work cut out for her, and she's done an amazing job. But I just think it's important. I know when I'm listening to audiobooks, I like the accent to be there as much as possible. It just sounds wrong to have someone from Yorkshire being vocalized but with an American accent or a Canadian accent. It's just like, no. So it
Well,
was
and
just,
those who are interested, the narrator is Carolyn Hewitt. Carolyn did The Rhino Keeper and The Porcelain Menagerie, both published by us, and we liked working with Carolyn so much that I recommended her for this novel. And she will be at our conference in March. So if anyone's attending the conference, Carolyn Hewitt will be there, and you can ask her all the questions you'd like.
she's wonderful.
Well, I do want to invite questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, you're welcome to post it in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand. You're welcome to open your mic and just ask. While I'm waiting for people to gather their thoughts, I want to ask Karla about, you've mentioned the indigenous elements of this story. Talk about those elements and sort of making sure they're not misrepresented, and maybe what some of the, like you mentioned, the Potawatomis, what they have, what their thoughts are on you telling this story this way.
So one of the most important resources I had was a member of the Potawatomi tribe, and it was surprising the number of things that I had gotten from the library and library resources at Notre Dame. These were language sources that I had because, and as we were just talking about language and trying to get it right, I was trying to get the names correct. Like what would be an actual name of somebody who was a member of the Potawatomi tribe at that time, in the 1700s, 1800s. And I had found names in these books that I thought were authoritative, and they actually were not correct, and the transliteration system was wrong. So he was great in pointing out those things that had that we just didn't have any resources on. And I think that's a frustrating thing in dealing with anything having to do with indigenous culture, is that it's oral tradition and it's
Mhm.
gone. A lot of that is gone. So some of the stuff is speculative. Another thing that he brought to the novel was just sort of a knowledge of the river that predates what I'm familiar with. So the river I know about has, I think, 9 dams on it. And so we were talking about one section of the book and the characters having to portage over the river. And he said, wait, he said, they just walk across it there. They wouldn't do that. And it's just, oh yeah, okay, that's right. So having him look at it and be able to kind of sign off on the things that I was talking about, he also had some really, really important insights that made me rethink sections of the book. So, having to do with gender, and I was pretty careful when I was describing Mishipeshu. She is a creature. I shouldn't say it is genderless for the indigenous tribes. It doesn't have a gender. And for me to suddenly apply that and say that it's part of an indigenous culture is wrong. And I didn't want to do that. That is my character. And that's what I've made her into. But does not reflect anything about indigenous culture. Also, the section that the slaves of Kaskaskia, that chapter. Um, the idea that there's going to be a one leader of a tribe, that was my supposition. I thought, and that's what you read about when you're looking at historical fiction and even accounts and Jesuit chronicles of their dealings with tribes. But from the inside, sort of getting the look at from how the Native Americans perceive that, leadership is really depends on what the problem is and what is being handled. So leadership is just sort of, it can be, what do I want to say, conditional. It's a conditional leadership. It's not that one guy is always the leader and he's our leader no matter what. So that sort of realization made me change the way that I had written that chapter. So I'm hopeful that the way that I've written it is respectful of Indigenous culture, and I think I've made it clear where I have diverged from that which is part of the lore, and now I'm made clear, I hope, that mine are literary characters.
Well, certainly sounds like there are a lot of intricacies that at the reader level, even at my level editing, I was not aware of, things that you had to kind of acknowledge and change. But that's great that you're ahead of that, that you're doing the work, that you've done it before it comes out, and obviously people are going to have different perceptions on different elements of the story. But just interesting to hear how intricate that gets.
Hmm. Yeah, and the framework is basically it's learning from Native American culture, but the actual stories, the chronological stories, so much of the history that we have access to happened after the removal of the Potawatomi. So a lot of that is just based on, okay, I had newspapers, I had documents that I could look at. So that wasn't as sensitive and it wasn't as speculative as some of the other stuff going back further in time.
We do have a question here in the chat from Elizabeth, who I believe is also in Vancouver, Carol. She says, regarding structure, the choir has 62 chapters. Why so many? How does the writer maintain the flow of the narrative with so many separate units? So, talk about the structure and pacing of the novel a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm getting a thing that my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully I can stay on here. I, the novel is actually two points of view. So there's Eliza's chapter, then there's a Ruth chapter, and then Eliza, then Ruth, so all the way through. I don't know. I didn't find that 62 chapters was that much, really. Each chapter's probably about 1,500 words, more or less. So kind of a normal length for a chapter. How does the writer maintain the flow of the narrative? I, I don't know. That's a good question. It's just, every chapter is, you're with Ruth, and then the next one you're with Eliza. I don't know. I think it works. I think it just flows, even though it's two separate characters, same time period, but they're doing two separate
Well,
things. So
I guess I
I
got
don't
a
know.
sense that it
What do
kind
you
of
think?
reflects the day-to-day lives that they were living,
Yeah.
because it does happen in a short period of time, and they have to get the kids to school, and they have to um, get on stage and rehearse and do this and do that, and it's just kind of a day by day
Yeah.
hectic kind of living. That's how I saw it in this kind of industrial period.
Yeah, and it takes place basically over just under a year. Really, the main part, and then they're sitting at the log books. Yeah, it's really only about 8 months. So yeah, it was. I guess it's true. It's structured by the seasons and by the okay, we got 6 weeks left, so the first competition, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, there are fairly short chapters from each point of view.
Well, I welcome any other questions that anyone might have. So I'll keep the chat open. And again, if you want to open your mic and ask a question directly to our author, feel free to do that, our authors. Carol, let me ask you a little bit about your work as an author. This is not your first rodeo. Talk about some of your previous novels and kind of where you're at in your writing career.
Well, The Choir is actually number 5 that's published anyway. I mean, like all authors, I got plenty more on my hard drive. But all my novels really have a focus of women in the arts. My first novel, which came out in 2014, a bit of a late bloomer. I didn't start until later in my career after I finished teaching. And that one, The Towers of Tuscany, is about a woman in 14th century Italy. And so it's about visual art. She's a painter. And then the second novel is about a composer, a woman composer. And the third novel is about an actress. So those are the 3 historical novels. The fourth one is a little bit of an outlier because it's contemporary, so I won't really talk about that. But it does have elements of the arts for sure. And then this one is music. So the arts are really important to me, and I just like writing about women who have been transformed and have had their lives made better through the arts and the struggles that they have, especially ones like in the Towers of Tuscany. I mean, it's 14th century. Women did not paint in the 14th century, as far as we know. So obviously there were lots and lots of challenges that she had to go through. Same with my composer in the 19th century. So yeah, the arts is kind of a through line in all of my novels so far. Although the one I'm working on right now may or may not have beyond arts in it. I'm not so sure. I don't want to
Still,
get like, so I have to do it in arts,
uh-huh.
right? But because it just briefly, I run a podcast called the Art and Fiction Podcast because I'm really interested in novels that are inspired by the arts, and I interview other authors who have written novels inspired by the arts, not just visual art, like music, textile arts, you name it. So that's kind of a interest of mine.
Carla, Nolan asks if there are some works of fiction that have influenced your story. So were you able to look at what some other authors have done with this sort of genre that you're or topic, and how has that contributed to what you created?
Less in the structure than in the voice. I've always loved Garcia Marquez, and so I really enjoyed that sort of the sort of lush perception of reality, and also just sort of the magical realism that you find in that. I just really enjoy his voices. And you can tell he's got a background in journalism, so it's very realistic, and yet there's always this sense that the supernatural is not too far away. And E.M. Foster. So Nolan should know that that's one of the authors that he introduced me to, and I just always loved his narrative voice and style. In terms of the structure, I kind of like the idea, and this is pretty characteristic of Russian novels, the interspersing of a different kind of form, and that's what I was thinking of with the goddess and her ability to comment on the action, and also kind of take it up to a different kind of philosophical level. And I think that's very common in Russian 19th century novels that tend to be very long. But I really appreciated the ways in some of those novels that those especially Dostoevsky does this. There's a chapter that then ends up commenting on the previous chapter or the chapter to come. It sort of ends up being kind of like an allegory, and to a certain extent. So yeah, I guess Russian authors, E.M. Foster and Garcia Marquez. But I'll never. These are just aspirational kind of things. I don't think that I'm in that league. But anyway, that was the inspiration.
Nice. Yeah, it was, well, I mean, it sounds like you could really go in depth on the literature behind those works. So same question that I had for Carol, Carla, but this is a debut, correct, for you? What has the process been like? What have you learned? What have some of the challenges been trying to figure this all out?
That's a really good question. Because, I mean, I'm old for a first novel like this, and I think the I've always enjoyed writing, and there's just not very many opportunities where somebody's going to give you a job to write fiction, and so I had to write where I could, and it sounds like Carol has a similar experience like that. I mean, you enjoy writing and but you can't really get paid for this, not
Mhm.
very well. So I did all kinds, I have done in my life all kinds of writing, but my principal love has always been for literature. I always loved literature, and that's, credit to my great teacher, Nolan Marcinek. But so that kind of love for literature, when I would teach literature, I felt like I really wasn't, I didn't understand it to a certain extent because you use a different language in order to critique literature. You talk about its structure, you talk about its characters, you take it apart, but in order to understand how it's made, I just wanted to do it. And I wanted to have that experience of creating something. So I think to a certain extent, it's sort of my love letter to literature. And I hope I can do more of this kind of thing because it's so much fun. And
Mhm.
I feel like this is without doubt the most difficult kind of writing I have ever done. And it's easier for me to write about, I don't know, super black materials or chips, computer chips of various kinds. And I don't know whether Carol will second that, but I feel like, wow, this is a limit. And I think even further would be poetry. I mean, I think of poetry as kind of the rocket science of literature, and I'm just amazed at the people who can do that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that's a great way to put it. There's so much craft behind all this, and I mean, I
Mhm.
speaking from my own experience, I started writing novels prior to going into school to get a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and was just overwhelmed with all the different elements that go into it and the pieces and the fact that every word means something, like it matters. So yeah, kind of interesting to hear you give that perspective. Carol, we talked to Carla about what she's reading. What do you like to read?
Oh gosh. Well, right now I tend to read mostly novels about people I'm going to, rather than written by people I'm going to interview. There's only so many hours in the day. So I do tend to, favor historical fiction for sure, and novels that have something to do with the arts because I just love the arts. In terms of my own influences, Jane Austen. I did my degree in English literature in England, so it was very steeped in British literature. I wanted to do my dissertation on Mark Twain, and it was like, ooh, no, no, can't do that. They got me, but it was like a big deal. So yeah, that those are my influences are, the British novels, particularly Austen. But yeah, I don't know. I lost my train of thought, so I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, and I can relate there too. It's hard to sit down and read for leisure when you're researching for a book or
Yeah,
yeah, just trying to focus on. For me, it's definitely a lot of manuscripts that have not yet been
yeah,
published, and but it is nice when to read like a writer, they say, when you can, and that's kind of what Carla was talking about, and look at what's behind all that and all the work that goes into it. And I mean, you talked about it, you talked about that yourself as taking those singing lessons, like the intricacy that goes into developing these characters and figuring out the historical facts. I mean, that's awesome. So I can see
mhm.
why you're steeped in more of that research and less of the leisurely reading.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my leisure reading is novels that are I'm going to be interviewing the people, so
Oh,
it can be
sure.
quite eclectic. Because it just depends on who I'm interviewing. And then yeah, the other kind of reading is basically research. So I don't read as much for pleasure as I should. Although I mean, when I'm reading novels for the podcast, that's still for pleasure, because I only choose novels I want to talk about.
Hmm.
So
Well, I have I had 2 interviews this week for the podcast. I have 4 lined up next week. So the struggle is real. It's like trying to figure out what each one of these novels are about, and then
Yeah, a lot of
even
reading.
even with you two now, I've moved on to so many other novels since editing, and reading and
Mhm.
editing yours. So and why we can't remember Miss Donahue's name. So
I can't even remember it. Adelaide, that was her first name. It finally came to me.
well, I want to wrap things up here. First, let me say congratulations both to Karla and Carol. So glad to have you as a part of History Through Fiction and being able to bring these stories out into the world. So that's wonderful. Thank you to everyone who has attended this event. If you can tell others about these books, that would be wonderful. Karla Cruise's novel, Water Lilies of Mishipeshu, comes out officially January 27th. It is available for pre-order from History Through Fiction and anywhere else that you might order the book, such as bookshop.org, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Carol's book, The Choir, officially comes out February 24th. That's also available for pre-order from History Through Fiction. We'll be shipping those in December. And same thing, you can pre-order those other places as well. Before I do end things, let me just ask each one of you a final question here. So, Karla, we got deep into each of these stories and the mythology behind it and everything, but what's the final takeaway for readers? What's the overall message and theme behind this story?
Um, I described it a little bit with the way that Native Americans perceived spirits in nature and were at a reverence for nature and our commodification of nature. And I think that I have sort of a bias already that I think I look at development around cities, particularly when it's in places that are beautiful and remote, and you see like a stretch of 50 miles of highway, and you know what's going to happen. You know you're going to have it all developed, and you know you're going to have your um, maybe a garden center here, and maybe there's going to be a lumber yard or whatever. I just want there to not feel like there's that kind of inevitability, that there's a way of pushing back, and it's hard, but and because the whole, economy and everything is just geared that way. But I just hope that there is some reason to hope, and that there's some reason to work against that.
I don't know if you read John Green, any of his nonfiction. He lives in Indianapolis, and he kind of talks about Indianapolis the way you have mentioned South Bend, I feel like, where it's just your average American city, but he gets into some of the feelings behind all that, some of the history behind all that. It's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
And Carol, for you, what's the overall takeaway for readers when they're going to sit down and get to know Eliza and Ruth?
And Ruth, yeah. I think too that people, follow your bliss, I think, in a way, is really what it is. Is that when you follow, your true passion, what you really want to do, then life kind of works out in a way that sounds right. But that idea that redemption through the arts, but also through doing what is you're passionate about, and it might not look the way you think it's going to look. Neither person ends up the way you might think they're going to at the end of the novel. But and then the overall overarching power of love and of communion or community, community and forgiveness, and that kind of those kind of themes, where we are better together than apart. And I think that's pretty relevant these days, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Very well put. Well, Carla, Carol, thanks so much. Congratulations, and I'm glad we were able to do this.
Thank
Thank you, Colin.
you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
audience.
Thanks.
everybody.
Yeah, thanks for attending, and have a good rest of your day.